Hello and welcome to Gateways to Healing. I'm Scott McGuffey, clinical hypnotherapist and your host. Gateways to Healing is a program at which we look at how you can utilize complementary medicine with Western medical services. In this series of programs, we look at the 4 gateways to healing: mind, body, spirit, and community. Today, we're going to look at traditional Chinese medicine and the modalities that encompass that healing properties. To help me do that today, and certainly a lot better than I'm doing right now, are my guests from Integrated Healing Arts. And on my right is Dr. Larry Freeman. He is a board-certified family physician who is a pioneer in complementary medicine here in Palo Alto. He became one of the first medical doctors in California to pass the state acupuncture licensing exam. Dr. Freeman is also highly trained in joint manipulation, trigger point injection, emotional and spiritual counseling, and he integrates all of these modalities in a holistic way. We also have Lloyd Wright back with us. He is a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist. He has been in practice for over 14 years in the Palo Alto area. He has a diplomat from the National Board of Acupuncture Orthopedics and has served over 5 years on the acupuncture board for the state of California, which oversees the state regulations for licensing of California acupuncturists. And also Joe Deisher. Joe is an instructor in Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong. He spent 8 years studying these art forms in Japan and continues these studies here in San Francisco. Joe also teaches up and down the peninsula from San Francisco to Saratoga. He also has interests in astrology and the healing cosmic forces of nature. I want to thank the 3 of you back. You've all been in our program before, and today we're going to look at traditional Chinese medicine. Let us begin by looking at the rich tradition and history of Chinese medicine. Dr. Freeman, why don't you start us off here and tell us, how long has traditional Chinese medicine been practiced?
Well, there's a lot of debate about it. It seems to go back before historic time. The first complete text of Chinese medicine, which was quite comprehensive and showed that it had been a practice for many, many centuries before it was actually written down, is called the Yellow Emperor's Canon of Internal Medicine. And that dates back about 3,000 years. And the Yellow Emperor also dates back to about 2500 BC. So there may be 3,000–4,000 year history, continuous history of Chinese medicine.
And what's the story about the Yellow Emperor? Why is that significant to traditional Chinese medicine?
Well, it was the first text that was written. It was a dialogue between the Yellow Emperor and his physician, and it talked about all the health practices of the time. And when I went to acupuncture college in Oxford, England in 1973, we used that as a text to study, and it's still used and cited repeatedly in Chinese literature today.
Through the years then, how much has it changed? It sounds like it's pretty solid then, just from that original text that was written.
You know, many of the principles have stayed the same and been refined over the years, and additional principles have been added to it. But the basis of Chinese medicine, the idea of qi, the idea of the elements, were written down in that original text.
Interesting. And Lloyd, I wanted to ask you, you seem to know something about how traditional Chinese medicine worked its way outside of China and Asia. We know that, traditionally speaking, that China's been a pretty close country. It is to this day, pretty much. How did the news travel outside of that area?
Yes, an interesting question. Of course, it spread quickly to Korea and to Japan, but that's all within Asia. Really, the first indications of traveling outside of the Asian area came when the early Jesuit priests went to the Far East, and they began to bring back medicines and an understanding of medicine. Particularly noteworthy, the Jesuits who came back to France actually began a practice in the late 19th century and really began study at that time in Europe. Since that time, England has picked up styles, and Germany has picked up styles, Italy, of course, and the United States is really the newcomer in the West to understanding and beginning to integrate.
Now, as I understand it, there's an interesting study how it got to the shores of America.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, when Richard Nixon went to China, one of the journalists who was following along the trip actually got a case of appendicitis. The result of which is after they did the surgery, he was suffering from quite a bit of pain. They actually used acupuncture to reduce the resulting surgical pain immediately, rather quickly afterwards, and that caught the attention of virtually the whole Western world. And at that point, there was a lot more interest generated. But as it turned out, acupuncture had been being practiced in the United States for quite some time in, of course, all of the Chinatowns that had developed, particularly in San Francisco and probably to some degree Los Angeles and New York. But so it was actually already here, and having James Reston expose it and having that whole story come out simply encouraged people to go into the Chinatowns and find out more for themselves what was actually here.
And I think certainly my awareness before I started researching this program is that there are a lot of modalities included within traditional Chinese medicine. It's just not acupuncture, which oftentimes we associate that with. Joe, you work with Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong, which is also part of that. How have the modalities, like Tai Chi and some of the other ones, been accepted here in the West?
Increasingly broadly accepted. I'd like to follow up a little bit on this kind of historical thing, because
Sure.
An argument can be made for the fact that it was at least in part the influence of people studying Asian martial arts, who at least prepared the population, because very frequently if they got damaged in their martial arts practice, their instructor would apply techniques or send them into Chinatown to find a physician. And in some cases, Japantown or Vietnam has only come in lately. But all of the martial artists knew about this kind of stuff. That's one of the reasons it goes back 5,000 years and more, is that this was something that a person with a little bit of training could do. And in fact, it turns out that one of the expectations of a well-educated person is that they should know some basic stuff about healthcare and fixing immediate problems.
It almost sounds like what we have here today. I mean, you should know how to clean a wound and put a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. And change that to an energy perspective, you should be able to see if the energy has gotten blocked somewhere and be able to fix it up. One of the proverbs is that the village martial artist is the village healer. If you understand how energy works, you should be able to turn it on, or, if need be, shut it off.
Well, that sounds like a good segue into my next question, which is, what would you say is the basic underlying philosophy of traditional Chinese medicine? We're talking about energy, which is a little bit different than the Western allopathic. What is that underlying philosophy?
Qi stuff. You got to get into qi.
Well, certainly the concept of qi is primary to Chinese philosophy about human existence as well as healthcare. And in fact, what you find in Asia is that the philosophy about the world and the universe is the same philosophy that is applied to human beings. The notion that the macrocosm, the larger environment, is a reflection of the microcosm is primary to Chinese medicine. And all of this is pervaded by an energy that they call qi. And that animated energy is what gives us life. And some people have used the analogy that it's a lot like electrical energy that flows through our bodies, which we probably know very little about at this point in time. The Russian scientist Kirlian tried to find some physical evidence for this energy and developed a camera called a Kirlian camera, and to take these types of photographs. And this is a fingerprint. And what we did is we built this Kirlian camera and went into a dark room. It exposes the fingertip to a high electrical field, and any electricity that's coming off of the fingertip then causes the arc of electricity to spark out.
So what we're looking at here is actually qi energy?
It's the qi energy.
Now, it looks to me like it's kind of a lot like static electricity.
You know, this is sort of the best that we can do at this point in time.
Technology just hasn't caught up.
The qi varies in its intensity. It pervades our entire body. It probably is the thing that we feel. You know, we probably feel chi rather than feel our nerves or feel our tissue or what have you. We actually feel the chi. And some of this chi can be very low amplitude, and our technology, even with the most sophisticated measuring devices, are challenged to try and measure it.
Great. Let me open this up to Lloyd and Joe. How is chi used in healing?
Well, in the ancient Chinese text, what they began with is an understanding that the energy, or qi, is really starts off by dividing into two opposing or complementary opposites, what we call yin and yang. Roughly speaking, the yang component is expanding, warm, dry, masculine. The yin is more containing, more warm, or more cooling, moistening, and containing. Now, in Chinese medicine, these are viewed as necessary to each other. When we talk about opposites in Chinese medicine, they're opposite, but they need each other. One without the other dies. So it's really together they're unified. After the concept of yin and yang comes the principle of what's known as the 5 elements, which breaks into the concept of the 12 organs, and then you arrive at the symptoms and signs. And Joe, if you'd be so good as to bring our chart over here. Yes, that looks like a... this basic diagram illustrates the flow of energy between the 12 major organ systems. What the Chinese did about 1,500 years ago is they refined their theories and developed this theory called the law of 5 elements, which divides and places each of the 12 organs into one of these 5 groups. This actually symbolizes the nature of the relationships between the different organ systems. And basically, the names of the elements are fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. And in the fire group, you've got the heart, small intestine. Triple heater is your temperature control system, so it's not an actual physical organ, but rather a function of temperature control. Pericardium, of course, is a little sac that surrounds the heart. In the earth group, we've got stomach and spleen. Metal is lung, large intestine. The water group is bladder and kidney, and the metal or wood group is liver and gallbladder. I won't go too deeply into the nature of the relationships. They can be a little bit complex, but suffice to say that each organ has an effect on the other organ systems. Each organ will correspond to different groups of symptoms. You know, just to name a couple of examples, allergies will typically fall into the category of lungs. Digestion typically in the category of the stomach and spleen, and so forth. And this is all detailed out and has been observed over thousands of years and refined over thousands of years. So what you wind up with is a way to analyze the symptoms of the body, put it into specific categories, so then the practitioner can develop a strategy and employ the proper tools to resolve the imbalance of the flow of energy between the different organ systems.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Lloyd. Joe, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Well, Lloyd started right off with yin and yang, and part of my game is Tai Chi Chuan. And Tai Chi is the circle that contains the yin and yang.
Oh.
And so a really good translation for Tai Chi Chuan actually is balance boxing. And that of the very essence in Chinese healthcare is the maintenance of balance. Balance, please.
Balance of the chart.
Warm and cool, the balance between masculine and feminine, and on and on and on. In movement, balance is also an issue, being able to balance on one foot, but also being able to balance forces coming into one's own realm. These can be seasonal, these can be changes in dietary patterns, they can be the thrust on the end of a fist. How do you balance these things? How do you maintain your own balance in regard to that sort of thing? And an enormous amount of Chinese medicine can be seen in this way. When approached in the physical modality and maintaining your own physical balance in movement, this really grounds it as an experience. Yes, balance is clearly an issue. In the gerontological stuff that's coming up these days, the working with the elders, the ability to maintain balance. There's been some really interesting studies of Tai Chi Chuan, specifically with reference to having the strength in the legs to maintain balance. That's almost a superficial approach to it, but it shows the profundity of it.
So the basic essence of working with traditional Chinese medicine, whichever modality you pick, is to balance the yin and the yang. Is that correct?
Balance, balance is primary, and relationship. And like what Joe was saying is in Chinese medicine, it's a relationship to the environment, to the seasons, to a diet. It's a relationship, like Lloyd was showing in the 5 elements, of one organ to another. In fact, one of the things that I discovered when I was studying Chinese medicine is that when you're doing a Chinese diagnosis, what you're trying to do is see the relationship of all the different symptoms that a patient might have. So a patient might come in with indigestion, sinus problems, pain in the knee, and in Western medicine we might send them to an orthopedist, a gastroenterologist, and an allergist. Okay, but in Chinese medicine, they might all be seen as the same imbalance and be treated much at the same time with maybe even the same acupuncture point. And so I always have viewed Chinese medicine, because of this feeling of relationship, how everything comes into the one, the circle that Joe was talking about as far as Tai Chi, as being an implosive form of medicine. That is, taking all the various information that you get and trying to bring it more and more into a unifying concept, where Western medicine is a very explosive form. That is, we get more and more specialization, we refine it into greater and greater degrees and separate things out. And both have their place and their function and their usefulness. But it was very refreshing to sort of see these patterns that patients would come in with that fit these Chinese diagnoses that I would have never recognized as a Western physician.
And that means a lot, coming from you, being a Western physician.
Yes.
I think this would be a good time also, Lloyd. I was just sitting here as Lloyd was talking, thinking about your garden metaphor, which you shared with me a week ago, and I just thought that was fabulous, and we definitely have to share it with our viewers here.
I think it's worthwhile sharing. I like to share it with a lot of my patients as well. Basically, one of the ways that I think a traditional Asian or Chinese practitioner would view the health is a lot like having a garden, and you would have your garden would say have 12 different sections of your garden, and you would have different ditches that go out and would deliver water to each of these gardens. And of course, your job is to go out and make sure that you've got all the proper nutrition in each garden. And as long as everything has a proper balance of air, sunshine, water,
They have good relationships.
They have good relationships. Your crop is good. But what happens sometimes in life? We get a little stressed. Well, in your garden, what might that mean? Well, it could mean a lot of things. Well, let's just pick on one. Let's just say somehow a boulder goes and drops into one of your ditches. It creates a blockage for that water. Well, that means one of your gardens is going to be deficient of water. It won't get enough water. Another one of your gardens, that water's got to go somewhere, so it's going to go somewhere else. Maybe it'll go to the one next door to it. It winds up getting flooded and has too much water. Well, you think to yourself, what would possibly happen with this kind of thing? Well, over here the crops might get weak. They may become susceptible to insects or some of their parasites. Over here there's too much water. Well, we know too much water tends to create fungus, so you get mold or fungus on this group over here. And the Western answer to that, by and large, is spray this one with pesticide and this one with fungicide. And the traditional Chinese medical model says, find out where the boulder is and get the boulder out of the ditch. Now, what I like about this model is, believe it or not, it allows for both systems of medicine, because there are some days where you come across a case where there are simply too many insects that have simply overwhelmed this garden. You really need the insecticide over here. But you need to get the boulder out too. So there's times when it's not that bad over here and just removing the boulder is enough and everything goes back to its normal balance. So there's a place for both types of medicine in my garden analogy, and I think it's very, very befitting of where we're at now with integrating these systems of medicine.
And I wanted to come over to Joe with kind of leading off of this is also maintenance and how important that is within the traditional Chinese medicine model.
And going out and walking through your garden and checking the ditches and keeping things cleared up, and if there's a rock, move it quick before it causes things to jam up and get too wet in one places and dry in the others. And the place where people usually do this in traditional cultures is early in the morning. And you just walk through the house and clean everything up, make sure all the flows are going, and you're breathing well, and all that's working. And then when the sun comes up over the horizon, you're ready to go to work. But like they say in the economic world, you've paid yourself first. Right? You've taken care of your own health. And then you have the juice to do in the world what you must do in the world.
We're actually going to see a little bit of Joe doing some Tai Chi here. There are certainly ways, and I just wonder whether they get that queued up, talk about the various modalities. I mean, there's a lot more than just acupuncture, and we've talked about the Tai Chi. Why don't you just, Larry, why don't you give us a few of the modalities so that we know how integrative this force is?
Well, a couple of the modalities that I concentrate on in my practice is acupuncture, using needles, and also manipulation, which has always been part of Chinese medicine. I do manipulation much more like an osteopath or chiropractor would perform, but when you really go over to Asia and you see what type of manipulation they do, it's quite similar to those kinds of modalities. And I find them, extremely useful for a wide variety of conditions. Lloyd, he uses a lot of herbs as well as acupuncture.
Certainly. Most of my practice focuses on the use of both herbs and acupuncture. I encourage all of my patients to practice Qigong or Tai Chi or yoga, whatever their personal preference is. We also get to some degree into nutritional dietary issues as well.
Great. And then we have Tai Chi, Qigong, and there's a lot of different areas in the martial arts there as well.
But movement is a big piece of it, and you look at some of the Western research as well as the traditional Taoist Chinese material, and they say it's diet, exercise, carriage movement, exercise. Social relationships, which they don't talk too much about because if you're Chinese you don't have to talk about that, that's determined, but they do talk about spiritual practice. People need vision.
So
and that's one of the things that this has given us is a vision for holding things together. And in our Western mode, where we've gotten so extraordinarily particulate, that explosive view that you mentioned, Larry, then we've lost the sense of relatedness and relationship. And I thought you brought that up very nicely.
One of the things with regards to all of these modalities is that the heart of Chinese medicine is really prevention. And going all the way back to the Yellow Emperor's book on internal medicine, in this dialogue between the Yellow Emperor and his physician Chi Po tells the Yellow Emperor, only the inferior doctor treats people who are ill. The superior doctor treats them before they get ill. But the supreme doctor only teaches. And so 3,000, 4,000 years ago, they really realized that herbs, acupuncture, manipulation, these types of interventions are very useful in getting people back into balance. But to maintain balance is to learn how to do that, and that's where teaching comes in. And at Integrated Healing Arts, we have a classroom. We're dedicated to teaching Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, meditation. And most of these modalities are different than some of the things that we emphasize in Western medicine with regards to exercise, in that it's sort of that idea again of going inside, of being implosive. It's an internalization. When you're doing Tai Chi, when you see Joe doing Tai Chi, you will see that he is really concentrated on the whole process that he is going through. And by doing that, he is checking out his garden every time that he does Tai Chi. When you do meditation, it's a way of checking out your mental and emotional and spiritual garden and seeing how it is, and trying to pick up when there's some rocks in there that you should be removing. So this process of internalization and the process of teaching is extremely important part of Chinese medicine.
And it's extremely important at this time because the medical business is burdening the United States economy to an extraordinary degree, individually as well. Something more than half of the labor disputes at this time are disputes around what's called health insurance, but it's actually medical or illness insurance, which illustrates just how important illness has become and what a burden it is.
We're just about ready to wrap up here, but I wanted to get one final question in, and that is, what suggestion do the three of you have for our viewers to help them integrate traditional Chinese medicine into their self-healing program? What are some of the ways that they can begin to explore these modalities?
Well, I think Western medicine is extremely strong in diagnosis and in taking care of dangerous acute situations. But if you find that you have a condition that hasn't really responded to medication, and you find yourself taking medication over a long period of time, if you find just your vitality, your general vitality and energy is diminished, if you have some chronic illness that you're not really too keen on taking pharmaceuticals for long periods of time, then I think it's really advisable to look into traditional Chinese medicine, because it is a very comprehensive form of medicine and can treat any organ system or any particular condition. So I think it's very useful for many of the things that Western medicine falls short on.
Lloyd, you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think that pretty well tops it off. I would tend to agree strongly with that. I would just suggest for people who are interested, don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call and talk to an acupuncturist. I get calls all the time. People want to know if it works well for this or for that. And that's oftentimes a great place to start. They can find out if what's bothering them actually can be helped with acupuncture. And then if they go, they can follow up eventually with some good maintenance care, such as the Qigong, the Tai Chi, which I think is always appropriate, and I'd love to see everybody doing something along those lines.
You know, even in the West, when you go and consult a physician, you can say, I think I ought to get a second opinion. Or sometimes the doctor will say, you ought to get a second opinion on this. Get a second opinion from a second system.
Oh, good idea. I had never thought of that, actually.
Get a real second opinion.
Yeah.
That's good. I like that.
And even the Tai Chi and the Qigong, I mean, that's something that can be maintained for life. Check your garden every day.
Absolutely. And the more tens of thousands of miles you get on your vehicle, the more you got to do maintenance. When it's young, you don't have to do too much maintenance. But the more years it gets on it, then the more it responds to maintenance.
And that's a good note to end on. I want to thank my guests today, Dr. Larry Freeman, Lloyd Wright, and Joe Deisher. And I want to thank you, the viewer, for joining us today on Gateways to Healing as we looked at traditional Chinese medicine. I'm Scott McGuffey, your host, and until we see you again, here's to your health.